So I'm going to be talking about the Macpherson report and explaining why it is that Britain has a two-tier police system in place at the moment. So I'm sure that most of the panel will be familiar with this. Lauren, you've lived in Britain before. Are you aware of the Macpherson report and everything that went on with that? All right, then. So I just thought it would be good for explainer for our audience and anybody who might not be aware that this is why it is that foreign communities and minority communities are policed so differently as they are in the UK from the white native population. This was an idea that a friend of the show, Binary Surfer, gave me, so I thought, shout out to him, so thank you very much for that. And it explains why exactly we have problems like this, where a white police officers lost out on jobs after orders were to pick an Asian candidate coming from the top. This was a case where it was a superintendent said that you need to pick an Asian detective inspector.
Not Japanese or
I'm
Chinese.
sure he'd talk about Koreans.
That kind, no. If I scroll down, the name is included somewhere down here. Sergeant Sidhu, where you've got that situation where 3 white British officers were passed up, some of whom were already detectives. This person was a sergeant, hadn't even been an inspector or anything that would qualify her for the position, and got appointed anyway. So they thankfully won a employment tribunal related to this. So I'm actually shocked that they did decide that, yes, this was something, that it was a case of discrimination. Because this normally, as far as I'm aware, wouldn't happen, because they would go, you're white, positive discrimination is always a good thing. So there's DEI in the police services, and then you have issues where Yvette Cooper, our Home Secretary, saying that the UK has lost all respect for its police force in the wake of the riots.
Because they've behaved abominably.
Yeah, why would that be? Why on earth would that be? So one way to look at this is you can say that obviously this is a result of the increasing diversity in the country in the very first place, but there needs to be institutional barriers in place and institutional rules set to make it so that they can get away with all of this without getting in trouble. And where does that all start? Well, it goes back to the murder of Stephen Lawrence. For those who aren't aware, Stephen Lawrence was a black British 18-year-old of Caribbean background who died on the 22nd of April, 1993. He was stabbed to death by a group of 5 or 6 men, and in the immediate case following it, the police, admittedly, did an absolutely terrible job of following up on some of the evidence that they had, and didn't do a very good job, and ended up not being able to get anybody convicted for it because it went to court and they decided there wasn't enough evidence to determine that the people that they'd brought in had actually done anything. There wasn't enough evidence to actually identify them properly. So this became a big thing. The Stephen Lawrence family decided to make a big campaign of it for a very long time, for a few years, until in 1997, Jack Straw, part of the then new Blair Labour government, decided to start an inquiry related to it, which led to the Macpherson report, which concluded that the police were institutionally racist and led to a spate of other changes to the way the policing system in the UK worked, including removing the double jeopardy rule in cases of murders. Would anybody like to explain what double jeopardy is?
Sure. Well, it's basically where you can't be tried twice for the same crime.
Yes, if you've been acquitted already for one crime, they can't bring you in to charge you for it again, because that could lead to a situation where you could just bring somebody in to the court again and again and again. Even if you don't have the evidence to convict them, you're going to waste their time and probably ruin their life and smear their reputation. That got dropped for murder on cases where there was compelling new evidence found, and that was in the wake of advances in DNA technology and things like that.
If I remember correctly as well, there was something to do with one of the boys involved in the group that had stabbed Lawrence, insinuating that something had happened with the group, and they said that they got him on racially aggravated remarks or something like that. Because this has always been depicted as Britain's George Floyd.
Yes.
Before George Floyd. This has always been depicted as a racist attack. I know someone who... So I'm in Bexley, Eltham's neighbouring borough. Like I used to go to Wellhall Church for a while. I know someone who was at a school at the same time as Stephen Lawrence and his brother, that went to the recreational youth clubs, the same as the sort of stabbers. There was it was essentially gang violence. And this has always been depicted as like a KKK-style lynching.
Certainly the way that the Wikipedia page describes it makes it sound as though he was just some black guy standing next to a bus stop and 6 white guys decided they were going to murder him for no reason.
It's horrible that he has been murdered, of course. But the
murder bad.
Yes, shock, yeah. And I'm sure me saying that will stop it forever. But the oversimplification of this has been to drive the narrative that the police are institutionally racist, that Britain itself is institutionally racist, and given a mandate for the new Labour government and their acolytes to refashion the country as they see fit.
Well, yeah, the very fact that it was something the inquiry was set up under New Labour is definitely a sign that this was a purely politically motivated situation, because if they had really had grounds to believe that it was racially motivated, that being the police not following up on evidence at the time, then the inquiry should have started then. It was only under New Labour. They were given a golden opportunity to take advantage of the situation, politicise it, publicise it, and allow them to turn British policing upside down and just fold it into the greater revolution that they effected under their first terms in Downing Street. So more information on the Macpherson report. Who staffed it? Who was actually on the inquiry? Well, it was Sir William Macpherson, retired High Court judge and former soldier. He was the chair. He was advised by Tom Cook, a retired deputy chief constable, Dr. John Sentamu, the bishop for Stepney, and Dr. Richard Stone, the chair of the Jewish Council for Racial Equality. So quite a motley crew right there. Some people on there, I would raise my eyebrow and say, what are they doing? But either way.
Dr. Stone just seems like an activist.
Well, yes.
Right,
yes.
Okay.
Also, according to Peter Hitchens, who describes the situation in his chapter Institutional Defeat from Brief History of Crime, which later got rebranded as Abolition of Liberty, the Black Police Association were involved in giving evidence to the Macpherson inquiry. Again, a politically motivated activist organisation. So the 350-page report concluded the investigations of the killing had been marred by a combination of professional incompetence, institutional racism, and a failure of leadership. And the only thing that people paid attention to really was the racism part of it, yes. And the report's authors stated that the debate about policing and racism had been transformed by the inquiry, which is true. And they put forward 70 recommendations, including revoking double jeopardy for murders. And they said here, the included measures weren't just to transform the attitude of the police towards race relations and improve accountability, but also to get the civil service, NHS, judiciary, and other public bodies to respond and change. So like much else under New Labour, it was a case of, well, we're going to focus on this one specific thing, but apply all of the lessons we've learned from it to all of society. It's not just the institutional racism of the police, that's a sign of a greater malaise underneath the British spirit and the British psychology, which is you're all racist. So we need to change all of the institutions so that we can continue to therapize you into being
anti-racist.
Anti-racist, yes. So it says as well, they included the introduction of detailed targets for recruitment, retention and promotion of black and Asian officers, as well as the creation of Independent Police Complaints Commission, the IOPC now.
Is that how they keep dobbing in their officers for offensive remarks, and then that's how you get promoted? Right. So,
yes,
the internal snitching infrastructure came from this.
Yeah, it completely changed the atmosphere of policing, because of course now the fear would not be, well, am I doing a good job? It's, am I doing my job in a way that won't get me reported to the IOPC?
And they made that even worse. I know they've lifted the requirement now, but for a while, you were required to have a university bachelor's degree in order to become a police officer. And so, like, military service on its own wouldn't count. So they've just staffed it full of...
Well, they staffed it full of people who would have been already educated in a way that means that they're predisposed to these views, and then made it so that the only constituents that you could police in a way that couldn't get you in trouble, potentially, would be white areas. Preferably white working class areas, because they have the least power of anybody to really kick up a fuss about it. Furthermore, in the Institutional Defeatism chapter from Peter Hitchens, he quotes a particular line from the Macpherson report, which defines racism or a racist incident. Can you all guess what it's going to be? Is it going to be fair? Is it going to be objective? Is it going to be harkening back to the days of good old MLK?
Is it like the circular definition of Islamophobia that Labour's adopting?
It's to do with perception, isn't it? It's a perceived incident.
And specifically against non-white people. I doubt that it's something that goes both ways.
Well,
is
you
it?
could. Well, it's broad enough that you could say that it should go both ways, but it only gets applied one way. A racist incident is any incident which is perceived to be racist by the victim or any other person. So it's a gay race communism definition.
Thank you, Kahindi Andrews, for citing the two words you were meant to define in your own definition.
Yeah. And further on in the report, it says that colorblind policing, that would be, in a multi-ethnic society, basically the only policing that would actually work and be fair to everybody, must be outlawed. The police must deliver a service which recognizes the different experiences, perceptions, and needs of a diverse society, which basically means black people and Middle Eastern people feel really bad. They feel really bad when you police them for committing crimes. They don't like being arrested, shockingly enough. So don't do that.
I feel like if you don't want to be treated like the English, you should not be in England, period. It doesn't matter. I mean, if you don't like the way that the English are treated by the English government, then don't
Which is
come
why
to England.
so many English people are leaving now.
Right.
I feel like the English are probably one of a very rare breed of people in the world who, if a family member of theirs committed a terrible crime, would actually dob in their own family members. Because of the fact that we have this feeling and general
Canadians
sentiment.
would, absolutely.
I'm sure the
100%.
Canadians.
We'd be on the hotline.
That's because Canada and America and the like were English ethno-states.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've got the Anglo culture.
Did you see the reaction to the mother of the girl who was killed by Valdo Calacane? Did you see that on the subject of... So Valdo Calacane was this schizophrenic chap who went around stabbing...
This is the Nottingham thing. Yes.
The Nottingham thing, yeah. He went around Nottingham, black chap, just stabbing people, and he killed a girl and a chap, and I think maybe another person as well. But anyway, the mother of the beautiful young woman who was killed by Valdo Calacane went on LBC with that chap. I forget his name, Nick, whatever his name is.
Yes, Ferrari.
Nick Ferrari, the man with the Ferrari, and she said that she didn't feel any sympathy for the family of Valdo Calacane, the family of this schizophrenic chap, because people have been saying, they're victims too. They deserve sympathy because they tried to do as much as they could, to get him treatment. And
they raised him.
Right. Well, she said that. She said, look, his parents raised him and they brought him to this country. She said that as well. Mm. And so, there was an enormous backlash against her on Twitter. So there were all these, abysmal comments about...
From abysmal people.
But what it does show, I think, is the degree to which actually people, certainly in this country, appear to have been turned against their better instincts. It's like they can't even empathize with a mother whose child has been brutally murdered in the street by a knife-wielding maniac. They actually think that, they can't understand that someone like that would feel deep, deep anger about the murder of their own
we
child.
just saw this with the Southport stabbings, right? You actually had children dying, being killed in the streets, but a lot of the, Twitterati elitists, they were more upset about the buildings that were being burned as a result of it and the fact that migrants might not feel as warm and cozy.
But also just mean tweets that should not have misidentified the stabber, but the mean tweets themselves were the problem because they were going to incite violence, as the old Norm Macdonald joke.
And heaven forbid there be any violence against non-white people. That would be truly the worst thing imaginable.
Except that committed by non-white people.
Yeah.
Right,
Well,
then we just ignore that.
They believe just the dagger floats through the air like it's a scene from Macbeth or something. And also, a quick thing on that, that's the same mother who, alongside the other grieving families, were trotted out in sunglasses to hide their tears at a giant festival in Nottingham with hashtag Love Wins, because the Home Office has a unit called Raiku, which manages public perception after a terror attack. And so they invented things like Don't Look Back in Anger for the Manchester Arena bombing.
If you need an actual department dedicated to that, I would say that would be much more better spent, those resources on limiting migration and actually policing the communities that we know are more likely to commit these problems. Have you guys seen that meme? And this, this often happens. We saw it with Molly Titbits, stateside when women especially are killed by illegal immigrants, like the idea that we don't want to make it about race. There's this one meme like me after being killed by an illegal immigrant, my friend, like I know him, he would never want it to make it about race, and then you see like the meme, like the
rising
dead body
from the grave, Undertaker sitting up from the casket.
But that's exactly what happened after the London Bridge attacks. It was they brought along this guy who they were using as an example of how rehabilitation from terror offences works to a Cambridge PhD seminar. He showed up, he killed the two people that were presenting him as the example, and the dad came out and said, my son wouldn't have wanted you to spread racist hate. It's like, yeah, sorry, your son's
Well, there was
admirable belief
also-
in rehabilitation was wrong.
Right. But I feel like it's because of this idea that we have that racism is the worst thing possibly imaginable that you could ever do, especially any sort of ethnic sense of identity if you're European. And that this is really born from a post-World War II liberalism. And we see that I'm not for racism, but also I'm not an idiot and I can read statistics. So where does that leave us then?
Well, on that point, I think one of the worst things to consider from what Roarag Nationalist was saying about the people who were commenting on Twitter, saying with this backlash over this woman, I think it's probably likely that those people, after seeing that, oh my goodness, this woman made some racially insensitive remarks, they probably feel that on some level she deserved to have that tragedy happen to her. I'll move on. I'll carry on and just point out that Hitchens points out that if the police were truly institutionally racist at the time when the Stephen Lawrence murder happened, well, they were also arresting white people in London who had killed black people for no reason other than racism, supposedly. Actual hate crimes as they would be defined right now. They had been arresting and convicting them in 1991, 1992, 1993, the year that it happened. So it was very strange that this was the one case that they decided that they were going to be racist about and not look into. That would be a very strange conclusion to draw. And if I go on as well, there is this report that was released after the initial Macpherson report that was done by these three people, Norman Dennis, George Erdos, and Ahmed Al-Shahi. Now, you can tell Ahmed is not an English name, and Norman Dennis and George Erdos are actually socialists. They call themselves ethical socialists. But this is a... I know it sounds like an oxymoron, but still, let's carry on. This report was done criticizing the Macpherson report and absolutely tears it to shreds from top to bottom, going over all of the evidence that was provided, going over everything that was said and looked into. But I think the summary sums it up appropriately quite nicely, where they point out all of the problems, where they say rules of evidence were modified and witnesses were harassed both by the members of the inquiry team and by the crowd in the public gallery. Representatives of the Metropolitan Police were asked to confess to charges of racism, even if only in their private thoughts, literal thought policing going on. They were even asked to testify to the existence of the racist thoughts of other people. However, this is common law now.
I'm just imagining Charles Xavier just conjuring slurs.
As we all do. However, no evidence of racist on the part of the police was ever produced. There was no attempt to show that the Metropolitan Police Service was racist in the sense of being formally structured to put members of ethnic minorities at a disadvantage, nor was any evidence produced that individual officers dealing with the murder of Stephen Lawrence had displayed racism, unless one includes the use of words like coloured, which are currently out of favour with the professional race relations lobbyists. No evidence was produced to indicate that the police would have handled the investigation any differently had the victim been white. But again, when the whole idea of racism is if it's perceived to be racist, which in the report, if you read it, even Stephen Lawrence's parents didn't think it was racist. They just didn't think it had been handled well. So his Caribbean parents were saying, no, we just want justice for our son because he was murdered brutally. And the report and everything else in the inquiry goes on to turn it into a gigantic racial issue. To question whether the murder of Stephen Lawrence was purely a racist crime was in itself adduced as evidence of racism. We're all familiar with that these days. The Macpherson report, they conclude, has had a detrimental impact on policing and crime, particularly in London. Police morale has been undermined. Certain procedures which impact disproportionately on ethnic groups like stop and search have been scaled down, and the crime rate has risen. So that's from a leftist perspective, perspectives that you would expect to not be on our side. But even they can accept the objective reality that this has made the police service far worse, because it was an overtly political maneuver by New Labour to destroy British policing. And let's see how it still affects us today. Well, what's the IOPC up to? Well, on the 22nd of April this year, it was Stephen Lawrence Day.
Right, so that would explain why they have a much softer touch when policing the Leeds and Hare Hills riots, or regarding the Manchester airport incident, or any of the Palestine protests.
Well, they actually did. They're currently looking into the Manchester airport incident, the IOPC is, and
they haven't still been charged.
I'm sure they're going to conclude that it was a racist incident. And the fact that I can predict that, and I'm 99% sure that it will be correct, says everything you need to know about the objectivity of such an organisation. They say in this article, our close history with Stephen Lawrence and his legacy is one that we should never forget. His racist murder led to our formation as a result, led by Sir William Macpherson. There have been quite a few reports, reviews, and plans which have followed, all in agreement that if you are black, Asian, and minority ethnic, your experience of the police and your interaction with them may not well be a pleasant one. Well, stop committing crimes then. We have seen evidence of race discrimination and the disproportionate use of police powers, like stop and search and use of force, everything that the previous link was criticising for scaling back because it actually disproportionately affects the quality of policing. And also, I know it's a tired point, but it's the policing that goes on to protect people mostly within their own communities. So the people who will be disproportionately negatively impacted by this are going to be people within, say, Brixton, within these areas that have disproportionately high rates of crime. Who is it all of the postcode gangs in Brixton and elsewhere in London are stabbing? Well, it's other black people in these gangs. So, if the police actually did some policing over there, maybe less of them would die. But no, that could be racist.
This is a uniquely, I've got to say, a European problem. You don't see countries like Japan, like China, like South Korea asking, well, are we treating the foreigners good enough? Like, do we need to do more for them? Absolutely not. And there's that. I've been loving it because Japan, unfortunately, population collapse. They are starting to import people. The government is very much against the wishes of the people. There are now these viral videos of officials at airports literally just sending them right back, turn around. Absolutely not. Sometimes these migrants are crying, but it's like, you could do that.
I've seen a few
you
of
could
those.
just do that.
Very
It's
cathartic.
possible. We act like, oh no, we could actually quite easily do it.
It's always
we
a
just
choice.
don't have the will to do it.
Well, the Japanese don't seem to be as susceptible to look at picture of brown crying man, throw away your civilization.
Therefore, no laws or borders. Brown person cried.
Yeah, exactly. For some reason, our elite class are very, very sympathetic to that cause. They carry on and say this issue remains a persistent concern, especially within black communities, because of the ongoing inequalities that can influence policing and ultimately continue to erode trust and confidence in policing. So throw away all law and order. We are at the final stage of our work on race discrimination, which will come out in a report shortly. So there's going to be another report coming out. I searched through their records. I can't see that it's been published yet.
I know we're still paying for them to write the damn thing.
Yeah,
right?
so that will be coming out later on this year. It shines a spotlight on this long-standing area of concern to help maintain focus on policing and work towards an effective resolution. The work involved independently investigating cases where race discrimination is a potential factor to be considered and has helped us build a body of evidence to identify patterns or trends to improve police practice. So this will probably come with its own enormous spate of recommendations for how to shape up the police force in the UK, which will inevitably, as the Macpherson report did, make everything far worse. So that's something we've all got to look forward to, and expect the two-tier policing system to only get worse as time goes on.
I hope you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, and if you want to see what else we're up to, you can see behind the scenes from our obviously world-famous election stream, the British election stream, and it's a lot of fun. Definitely sign up and watch it. And if you want to see all the other things that we're putting out, we post links to all of them on our Twitter. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.